Bong Joon-ho, you've done it again.
Why aren't you dead? Multiples.
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. Today I'm going to be reviewing the latest Bong Joon-ho film, Mickey 17, starring Robert Pattinson as the titular character, Mickey Barnes, and every reprinted version of him. This is also based on the novel Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton, which I have already read and done a video on that you're more than welcome to watch if you would like to know more about that. First things first, I will share the pull quote or feedback that I sent to the publicity team that organized the early press screening, which I attended. Bong Joon-ho infuses Edward Ashton's novel with his own distinct sense of humor to deliver a wickedly funny, surprisingly romantic adventure to an alien world. Mickey 17 is full of biting satire, larger-than-life characters, and an emotionally compelling story at the heart of it all. The only thing better than Robert Pattinson playing an oddball with a funny voice is him playing 18 of them.
Nothing was working out, and I wanted to get the hell out of there.
I'm going to do a minimal spoiler section first, and then a section where I will go into full spoilers. And both of those sections are time-stamped. Mickey 17 is about a man named Mickey Barnes who signs up to be an expendable in order to be able to join a space mission to get off of the planet. I won't spoil the reason why he wanted to leave, but if you've read the book, I will say that the reason is somewhat similar, but not identical, and that sentiment can be extended to a lot of how Bong Joon-ho reimagined the book for this film version. The version of Mickey that functions as the film's protagonist is Mickey 17, meaning he's the 17th version of him. Whenever Mickey dies, he gets reprinted out of a machine that uses recycled organic waste to form his body, and then his memories are backed up onto a hard drive which are put into that new version of him. The job of an expendable is to do the most horrible, dangerous, and oftentimes deadly jobs that are necessary for the survival and betterment of the colony. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Mickey 18 gets printed out while Mickey 17 is still alive. When more than one iteration of the same person is alive at the same time, they are referred to as multiples. Now, multiples are a big no-no for reasons that do get explained, but I will refrain from going through those specifics if you are watching this part and haven't read the book. But if you have read the book, I'm assuming that you already noticed that they showed Alan Manikova in the film's trailer. The film's story is largely focused on Mickey 17 trying to navigate this predicament of existing as a multiple. And then on a larger scale, the story is dealing with these villainous leaders of this colonization mission of landing on Niflheim and trying to set up a new colony there, and the morally repugnant ways they want to go about that. Now that I've introduced you to the premise and some of the building blocks of the story's world building, here is some of my minimal spoilers feedback. I really love that Bong Joon-ho put so much of his distinct sense of humor into the screenplay. You can find this type of dark humor in other works of his. There's a fair bit of that humor in Parasite, more so before everything goes terribly wrong in that story and it turns into more of a thriller. But even in Snowpiercer, there were moments of unexpected humor, such as when they paused a battle to do a Happy New Year countdown, or when Curtis made Minister Mason eat one of those protein bars. Robert Pattinson as Mickey is also a great source of humor because of the specific choices he makes as an actor, the voices he does for these characters, physicality, and other details of how he goes about bringing 17 and 18 to life. Their personalities are quite different from one another, and that means we as the audience are able to see a lot more of his range as an actor. 17 and 18 are both quite different from the personalities of 7 and 8 in the book. 18 in particular has a very different behavior and attitude than 8 did. I also found Mickey 17 to be considerably more romantic than the book. Mickey and Nasha do have a love story in that source material, but there's a much more potent energy and chemistry between Robert and Naomie in the film. They work very well together, which was a welcome surprise as a viewer that loves to see romance and wasn't expecting it to be as romantic as it ended up being compared to what I had read in the book. With that book, sometimes it leaned more in the direction of telling the readers that Mickey and Nasha love each other, but you weren't always in a position to properly feel that love, since oftentimes the book frames things in such a way where it feels like the thing that ends up taking priority within the narrative is Mickey worrying about him and 8 being discovered as multiples, and he's also constantly fixated on satiating his overwhelming hunger. Following along with my earlier mention of Minister Mason in Snowpiercer, Snowpiercer. That was a very cartoonish villain, but they struck a really good balance where you could see that there was a lot of autorial disdain for that villain and what they do and represent. But at the same time, the ridiculousness of both their appearance and demeanor are integral facets of the film's satirical perspective. Now, Mickey 17 does something quite similar to this, where you have a pair of villains that are cartoonish and utterly ridiculous, but the threat that they pose is very real. The violence of their actions, rhetoric, ideology, the way that they gain and wield their power, it's all extremely dangerous and in no uncertain terms evil. In the book, Marshall is the main villain. He's Commander Marshall, and he embodied more of that military sort of archetype. When I read the book, I envisioned him as being more gruff and stern, but in the film, Marshall is not a lone villain. His character in the film has a wife, Ylva, and together they are a truly nefarious pair of war criminals. Marshall is also less of the gruff military archetype I had envisioned from the book, and instead, in the film, he's a failed politician who is also quite religious. Now, Marshall was religious in the book, but it's presented differently in the film. He's sort of a televangelist, a religious cult leader. It's almost like he's representative of the fusion of religious fundamentalism with political aspirations, and of course, colonialism. It might sound a bit incoherent the way that I explained it, but it actually comes across very well on screen. These alterations to Marshall's characterization open up new avenues for the story to explore or develop themes in a way that's distinct from the book. In watching Mickey 17, I experienced the full range of emotions that I like to experience from a really compelling film. I laughed a fair bit, I felt romanced, exhilarated, I felt righteous anger, as well as a satisfying catharsis when all was said and done. All around, it's another cinematic banger from Bong Joon-ho.
You're applying to be an expendable?
You read through the paperwork.
Yeah. I should have read through it.
But now I want to talk about full plot spoilers. I want to begin with elaborating a bit more on some of the differences between the book and the film. So Mickey's so-called best friend in the book is a man named Berto Gomez, who is a pilot, but in the film, his name has been changed to Timo. A fair bit of his characterization is the same as it is in the book, but I think I slightly prefer the book version of Berto, as well as how his relationship with Mickey played out over that story. In both versions, though, he is a very bad friend. But in the book, there are these brief moments where it's like you can see that there's more substance and depth to him, but you get the impression that he's never really nurtured that side of himself. He has moments of seemingly feeling guilty for being so inconsiderate of Mickey and his feelings and overall well-being. Mickey also punches him at the end of the story as a sort of karmic payback for all the years of misdeeds and mistreatment on Berto's end of things. But Timo in the film, there wasn't much that I could see in the way of character development, growth, or transformation. I didn't need him to be a much better person at the end of things, but the fact that he just gets to carry on more or less without consequence, I would have at least liked to have seen Mickey serve him a bit more strong of a dose of karma. I didn't need to watch a realistic, well, some friends just drift apart sort of angle between them. This is a film. I don't need it to be realistic. They are on an alien planet they traveled through space to reach using futuristic technology. Clearly, I am not here to see realism. Kat Chen had her name changed to Kai, and she's now a white woman. Why is it that when in the book she's a snitch, but then in the film, when you decide to turn her into a cool bisexual, she's no longer Asian? As I expected, the film removed a lot of the extra exposition and lore. The book would regularly do things like interject in between the developments of what's going on with Mickey to tell some sort of lore about a different colonization effort that happened on some other planet. If they had done that in the film, I already know that there would have been a bunch of viewers and critics complaining about the unnecessary tangents in the story. In a book, you can do that though. You put all of the lore in. Mickey 17 is already over 2 hours long, and too many people complain about films being too long as is, after which they go and binge 8 hours of some horrible reality television show that subjects the talent to inhumane working conditions. The math isn't mathing, but alright. But the one bit of lore or backstory I really wish they had included in the film was Nasha's backstory. I think she does more than enough in the film for people to be able to follow along with understanding her character, but I also liked her backstory in the book, and I did find that it enriches your perspective of her and how and why she does the things that she does, if you know it anyway, when you watch her on screen. But actually, let me talk a bit about Nasha and Mickey's relationship, because I cannot emphasize enough how utterly delighted I was to see that Bong Joon-ho made a romantic relationship for the romance girlies. The way the film goes above and beyond to show Mickey helping Nasha with her outfits, making sure she's always at her best so that she can go out and be the baddest one around. The way she was fully ready to throw hands whenever annoying weirdos were bullying her man. The way that they're so passionate but also really sweet with one another. Like the whole thing with the diagram of salacious positions. A massive part of why I loved that isn't simply because it's salacious or because of how it all comes full circle further on in the story. I really loved it because when they originate that in their relationship, they're laughing together. They're just having fun. Overall, they have a really sweet romantic dynamic, and I also like that more or less all of the conflict for their relationship is external. The issue is that there's villains trying to enact colonial violence on the indigenous population of this planet, but there's never any doubt that Mickey, any version of Mickey, and Nasha love each other. I did not predict after reading the book that the movie was going to be so for the romance girlies coded, but here we are. If I were to hone in on one of the major differences that best sums up the contrast between the book and the film, it has to be the creepers. In the book, the creepers are sort of like a collective hive mind, and the smaller ones are more so like mere extensions of that collective. They're not bothered or offended by the few instances where any humans destroy some of the smaller creepers. When the humans are able to acquire a sample of the creepers and bring them back to the lab, the scientists analyze it and they find that the creepers are not fully organic. The creepers are instead found to be some sort of hybrid Miltech. But in Mickey 17, the creepers are absolutely sentient organic beings. So when the humans kill one of them and take another hostage, they make it clear to the audience in no uncertain terms that these human leaders, these televangelist colonizers, they are holding a baby hostage, enacting violence onto it, and threatening to kill it as well. Now, anti-capitalism has been a prominent recurring theme across Bong Joon-ho's work. It was in Snowpiercer, it was in Parasite. I've also heard that it was prevalent in Okja, although I never watched that one because I heard it was about factory farming, and I know that if and when I get around to watching that, I'm going to need at least a day, maybe two, to recover, so I simply haven't found the time for that yet. But anti-capitalism is once again a massive part of Bong Joon-ho's storytelling in Mickey 17, because this time it's drawing a clear line between capitalism and colonialism. When I saw where Bong Joon-ho was going with Toni Collette's character, everything became clear about what spin he was putting onto the source material. Toni Collette is the co-leader of this televangelical empire that they're trying to build on this new planet. She cuts off the tail of a creeper baby. Let me say that one more time. A baby. And she blends that tail up to make a sauce. See, she's obsessed with sauces. She wants any and every condiment available for her own consumption. And at the end of the film, she's demanding that 17 and 18 go out and collect 100 tails from the creepers that have gathered outside because they know these demonic sky people, I mean humans, are holding a baby hostage. Because war crimes are just a game to her. But the fact that they're specifically targeting a very small portion of creatures that are indigenous to the planet for their own selfish interests, that prodded my brain in a very specific way that I went, oh, so like Amrita. You know Amrita, the fluid from the brains of Tulkuns that the filthy sky people were hunting the Tulkuns for in James Cameron's Avatar: The Way of Water? And listen, anytime you can remind me of the cinematic experience, the cultural reset that is James Cameron's Avatar, oh, I'm on board. 4.5 stars, Mickey 17 is now in my top 2 of 2025. Definitely a contender to be in my top 10 all the way through to the end of the year. This, along with the Chinese film Ne Zha 2, are currently my top 2 of 2025. I don't have a full review of Ne Zha 2, but I will be sharing more thoughts on my Patreon because I don't have the resources to review every film that I watch on YouTube. So every month on Patreon, I do a what I watched video where I rank and review every film that I watched for the first time that month. What Bong Joon-ho does in Mickey 17 that's so impressive, which is something that he also did in Snowpiercer, is that he manages to make what amounts to a giant blockbuster with a massive scale and scope, but it's never at the expense of the emotional investment in the characters and story. There's this strong thematic voice addressing the topics that he cares a lot about, and I also happen to care about. Listen, you give me a movie with romance, anti-capitalism, anti-colonialism, so essentially it's an anti-imperialist love story. Yes, of course I'm going to love it. And the speech that he gives Nasha to deliver, which is one that she did not have in the book, where she gives this impassioned condemnation of the marshals and their colonial violence towards the creepers. If I was inconsiderate of the people that were sitting behind me at my screening, I would have absolutely jumped up and given her a standing ovation because she absolutely earned one. Every climactic moment and development in the story feels completely earned, both intellectually and emotionally. There is so much to praise in the details of the storytelling, like some of the religious rhetoric of the marshals. It feels very Manifest Destiny. It feels very puritanical. They espouse very weird messaging about, well, shall we call it salacious activities between consenting adults?
Is that how old people say sex?
The fact that Manikova was specifically targeting unhoused people as his victims in the backstory explaining the lore of the technology used to create expendables in the film version, that fit perfectly into the anti-capitalist messaging. And maybe even the alteration of the story to include a space version of oxys. I forget what the full name was, but I believe it was some sort of fuel from the ship, but Timo sells it to interested customers. I couldn't help but ponder the idea that there was some sort of undercurrent where the film seemed to be using the trade and consumption of this fuel as being a further facet or symptom of the anti-capitalist storytelling, but that wasn't as prominent a part of that. Still, I couldn't help but take note of that because the oxys were not a part of the book. But overall, I would say that you should watch Mickey 17 if you like any of the following: compelling romance, action, comedy, drama, science fiction, Bong Joon-ho's other films, Robert Pattinson doing a funny voice, anti-capitalism, anti-colonialism, cartoonishly evil villains, blockbusters that don't look like disposable sludge, blockbusters with a deeper meaning, and just all around fun. If those things aren't for you, then perhaps you will look elsewhere, but otherwise, I would definitely say to go support this at the cinema because I feel inclined to skip so many Hollywood blockbusters nowadays because they feel extremely corporate and disposable. But with this film, there's such a clear vision and perspective, and it ticks so many of the boxes of things I love seeing at the cinema. So yeah, Mickey 17 is my type of film.